Now, here in Australia, as across the Asia-Pacific, all the talk is of the 21st century belonging to China. But what if it turns out to be America's century, just like the last? Well, our next guest thinks that is the eventual outcome after another crisis. He's Charles Dumas, chairman of Lombard Street Research in London and author of The American Phoenix, Why China and Europe Will Struggle After the Coming Slump. And he joins us now. Charles Dumas, welcome to the programme.
Hello, welcome. Glad to be with you.
Well, a phoenix rising from the ashes. Many might see your book as a work of fiction, those gluttonous Americans back on top. What are the forces that will drive this?
Well, first of all, there's the ashes, and what we're talking about here is the United States tightening its budget very severely and probably therefore precipitating a recession next year. At the same time, the Chinese have a huge overcommitment to exports and to investment. And as a result, and because they have been undervalued, they've got this major inflation problem, so they're having to slow down too. And I don't have to tell you that Europe's a shambles, so the whole world is basically turning down. So that's the ashes part. The recovery of the Americans lies in the fact that the Chinese inflation has finally achieved for America what the Chinese tried to deny them, which is a reasonable valuation of the dollar. Because all along, the Chinese latching their yuan onto the dollar created an artificial dollar zone in which China was undervalued and therefore America was overvalued. And now the Chinese inflation has stopped that.
You see the result of this is that the labour gap between China and America will be closing considerably.
It is closing a lot, yes. In dollar terms, Chinese labour costs are rising more than 10% a year. This is after allowing for productivity and all of that stuff. Whereas in America, they're flat to falling. So the bilateral relationship is changing 10% a year. And in fact, this has been going on for about 18 months, will continue at a lesser rate. So by early next year or the middle of next year, the Americans will have got a 20% leg up vis-a-vis China. And the Chinese will find that with America essentially restricting its demand because it has to get rid of all the excessive debt, that the export-led growth model no longer works. And they've got to find out... Sorry.
No, I understand that BCG has put out a report recently called Made in America Again, and the idea that actually many of the jobs that have been exported will actually come back. What sort of industries are we talking about?
Well, I mean, the most obvious industries are things like high-tech, but you've got to remember that the American industrial complex includes Mexico, and so they have plenty of cheap labour close to home, and they've found that, you know, these kind of very distant lines of communication and specialised product lines have not been too effective in conditions of disruption over the last 2 or 3 years. So having stuff close to home makes sense. And with the Chinese costs going up hugely, quite a lot of stuff in a whole range of industries is just less competitive coming out of China.
How important is fuel in your scenario?
Well, I think it's important, and not only fuel, but more homely for Australia is metals, because the Chinese have basically lived off dirt cheap labour and have been very wasteful of capital, energy, and metals and materials generally. And what we're saying is that because they're now not getting such cheap labour, they will actually have to start economising on all of these things. So we would expect that the big 12-year upcycle in oil and metal prices is going to go into reverse, and of course that has huge implications for the Australian economy.
And meanwhile, you see that America will actually become self-sufficient in its own energy.
I don't know about that. It's certainly become less dependent on imports, but, and of course there is this shale gas business which is very positive for the United States. But the main burden of our argument is the same thing as the Boston Consulting Group, namely that the new economics mean that China is just less favourably placed in terms of costs, and so a lot of stuff will be done at home in America, and there'll be better investment there too.
Of course, all this is happening a little further down the track. Immediately, we've got the Euro financial crisis to deal with the latest dramas with Greece overnight. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I think if you look at the debt levels and the cost competitiveness levels of Greece, but not only Greece, also Italy, Spain and Portugal, you'll find that there's no way that they can stay in the euro and grow. So if they don't mind a depression, they can stick around in the euro and take orders from Berlin and Brussels. But if they've got any sense, they'll make a negotiated exit. And it looks like the Greeks are going to move down that road rather messily sooner than we thought.
And finally, you don't see a great future for Germany.
Well, the problem with Germany is that they've been feather-bedded in the euro, rather like the Chinese with their cheap labour costs. They have this docile labour force, and as a result, the growth rate of output per hour worked in Germany, which used to be 2% in the 1990s, has been less than 1% over the last decade. So actually, people have got a little bit slack, and the best thing that could happen to Germany is that they go right back to the Deutschmark or something like it. The currency is strong, and the industries have to work harder and try harder to improve their productivity and cut their costs.
Charles Dumas, some very provocative thinking. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be with you.